So far, these dialogues have brought together over 800 participants in this period to discuss issues ranging from community policing and public safety, protection of public spaces, from the menace of land grabbing, better urban planning, cost of corruption in the health sector, among other exciting topical issues. Our mijadala are really intended to provide safe spaces for meaningful, respectful dialogue aimed at finding solutions and building positive relationships between citizens and leaders. Really, we think that is really important for us to always remember. We hope you will participate actively and meaningfully in today's discussion. Please join me in welcoming our Associate Director, Irungu Horton, who picks it from there. Thank you.
So once again, welcome and good evening to the Jadala series. We do this regularly, once a quarter. And the topic this evening is an excellent topic because it affects all of us, but it particularly affects 80 to 90% of our population who really struggle with a life of dignity and a life of ease when it comes to their basic fundamental rights. Some of us are familiar with the Constitution. If not, that is one document that should be beside your bedside. Particularly Article 43 gives me great inspiration. It is the article that says that no human being should live a life that is threatened in terms of their health, in terms of their housing, that everybody should have adequate food to eat and also safe water to drink. It also includes a commitment and obligation on our government to ensure that there is social security and that we all have access to education. So these are some of the rights that we voted for as a country and were enshrined in the Constitution of 2010. 6 years on, just after the transitional period, what we found is that by several studies, the particular one that we've highlighted is the IPSO Public Affairs Study. But there are others like the Kenyan National Bureau of Statistics, that Kenyans actually consume more than 102% of their income in 2013. In 2014, they consumed 103% of their income, and in 2015, it went back to 102%. 45% of most Kenyans' income goes to just two items, and that is food and drink. But maybe because we are somewhat suspicious of opinion polls and surveys, we could do one of our own just now, and I'm going to ask you, by show of hands, who here feels that the cost of living is the primary responsibility of the government? Raise your hands. Okay, I'm going to give you another option as well. Who here thinks that the cost of living is primarily the responsibility of the market, that the market and the economy really should generate a reduced cost of living? Raise your hands. You don't think like businesses have a responsibility? BAT, Unilever, which are the other big businesses out there? Unga Limited. Okay, so primarily we think it's a government responsibility. Is anybody undecided about this issue? Okay, interesting. All right, let's proceed with the conversation. Once again, our moderator for the evening is Renee Ngamau. Renee is a long-time friend. She's an active citizen. She is an integrity champion and continues to impact and create communities of wholeness through her life coaching classes. She is also a radio personality and sometimes does a number of motivational talks and training. For those of you who wake up next to somebody, we hope that you say good morning to that person, but the very next thing that you should be doing is turning on the radio and listening to Capital FM in the morning. And that's Renee, whose voice you will probably hear. So having done the plug for Capital FM, let me invite Renee Ngamau to take us through the conversation this evening. Welcome, Renee.
Good evening. So I did a little survey early this morning for those who were listening on radio, and I asked the question, whose responsibility is it to ensure that we have affordable food? Just food. And I said, let me know. Hit me up. If you listen to the show, then you will probably know this bit. Hit us up on 984 in the morning. Let me know who's supposed to feed Kenyans and who's responsible for the cost of food. The answer was squarely in the majority, government. It's a bit intriguing, primarily because government does very little of growing food. A little bit of setting prices, and then of course we went into the conversation about mumias and the price of unga and wheat shortages, etc., etc. That's on the one hand. A couple of days ago, when I was off air, I was moderating at one of the companies that Irungo has mentioned, which shall remain unmentioned for the purpose of this conversation. And they do a lot of packaging and distributing of food. And they're really clear that a huge part of their mandate is ensuring that food and consumables are made affordable for people. But here are some of the numbers for you to think around. 32,695 shillings a month is the average income or salary for most urban Kenyans. That number goes down slightly in the rural areas, and it is dictated primarily by how much produce there is in those particular areas. Out of 32,000 shillings, most of the people, about 60% of urban dwellers in Kenya living in either Nairobi, Mombasa, Nakuru, Eldoret, Kisumu, 32,000 puts you squarely in either a low-income, high-density housing area, aka a slum. We've now taken it to the next level. I looked at the Kenya Bureau of Statistics, and they say that of the 7,000 odd new reported or registered constructions, about 1,600 of them are commercial constructions. The rest are residentials. But if you listened to the speech by the CS Housing, Kaimenyi, this was in February of this year, about February, March, he said that we're in excess, we have a demand for over 250,000 units of affordable housing that are required in these 7 urban areas. The government's input, as at the end of March, had been 900 units, for which they were very proud. A drop in the ocean would be magnifying what that turns into. But let's really have this conversation. Cost of living. And its impact not just on the wallet at 105% of expenditures on that 32,000 that I've just mentioned for you, but what the long-term effect of consistently and constantly not being able to make a living wage has on the populace. But also, what is being done, what can be done, what role do we have, and what must we ask for so that we can all live within our own means. I shall not be having this debate because there are other people who are better suited to do so. Mine is simply to curate. So I would like to invite to the front our panelists for this evening, and I will introduce them to you. Our panelists today, and I will just call you up, and if you could be so kind as to come to the front. Our very first panelist, of course, is Dr. Joan Clos. He is the Executive Director of the United Nations Human Settlement Program, UN Habitat. Now, in his role, of course, and in that of UN Habitat, as you know, they're great advocates for decent and affordable housing at local and international levels. A round of applause as he comes up.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is one who is probably known to you very much, Kwame Owino. He's the Chief Executive of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Kwame has diverse interests in economic regulation, in employment economics, in public sector reforms, and Kwame has an uncanny knack of turning all of those figures and facts into highly chunkable and digestible facts that usually do not have more than 5 numbers at a go, which I think is an incredible feat. A round of applause for Kwame. Our third panelist, Cidi Otieno, is the convener of the Coalition for Constitutional Implementation and also a member of the Unga Revolution. If you recall, that will be that's a movement that's at the center of the struggle to eat. And one of the questions that I will be asking him immediately is that a human right? Do people actually have a right to eat? And if so, is there some place where they can agitate for that right? Or indeed, sue if that right, if we do agree that it is a right, is taken away from them. A round of applause for Cidi. Elizabeth Kariuki is the program manager at the Economic and Social Justice Program of the Kenya Human Rights Commission. She's an advocate of the rights of producers, consumers, and workers. And of course, we can't have a conversation about cost of living without having a conversation about what happens when people consistently live above their means and how that may lead to a criminalization of a certain populace. A round of applause for Elizabeth. So to kick us off, I will ask perhaps in the order in which they are sat from you, Dr. Clos, thank you ever so much, to really just open with a statement on where you see the state of urban development, what new trends that you're seeing as we continue to urbanize, not just in Africa, but here in Kenya, some of the challenges, and also some of the opportunities.
Okay, thank you. I think that to go directly to the topic, I think that one of the dominating features of urbanization in Africa is the high level of percentage of people living in slums. I think that if we want a clear image of what is going on, when we recognize that in the cities, urban areas, about 65% of the people live in slums, we already know that we have a big problem. Big problem which is related not just to the quality of housing itself, but is related to the relation between the salaries and the price of housing. Because if people lives in a house, in a slum, is because there's a double problem. The salaries they are not there, and the price of houses, both hiring or renting, they are out of their possibilities for the majority. And of course, the objective of any society who wants to develop is to diminish the percentage of population living in slums to as low as possible. Ideally to zero. But of course, when you are at 65%, you realize that you have a long process to go, and a lot of actions should be taken, are needed, in order to transform this sad reality.
Thank you. Elizabeth, I'll ask you to speak. Well, first let me ask Kwame, if you don't mind. Kwame, to speak to the endemic issues as we see them, or as are popularly seen, of the effect of corruption, grand-scale corruption on pay slips, on affordability, on work, and on availability of money circulating within the economy, and how that grand corruption has an effect in your and my pocket.
I think to make that link would require us to first understand why government exists. And the reason government exists is basically to provide what a student of economics would call public goods. And some of those public goods are things such as public safety, things that no single person can do for themselves, prepare pipelines so that we have water, for instance, at the same time roads, energy, the kind of things that we can't do for ourselves that require bigger organizations. So that's the first. Now, how does corruption come in? The first thing that corruption does is it basically depletes public resources that would then be dedicated to providing these pipelines, these things. So then you see potholes or rather the absence of goods. So even if a farmer has their goods in some place, it's more expensive for them to bring them all the way to Nairobi or wherever else that may be. So the first thing it does is, because corruption means that we have a deficit of public goods, roads being some of them, for instance, then our cost of living goes up by virtue of the fact that transporting our goods becomes necessarily expensive. So by one person stealing money to enrich themselves, it makes it difficult for the rest of us, most of us who do not have that access, then to access food and these other rights that we speak about. So that's the first. The second then is one of the other things that corruption does and its effect on public spending, I mean on cost of living, which is what we're discussing today, is it drives inequality between people. So we have a small number of people whose consumption patterns are completely different from the average, completely different. And of course, the final one is, because of the absence of efficiency, an economy does not reach its full potential.
We know that if somebody steals 20% of the public budget, it means that we're not growing as fast as we should have grown. That means that many more people don't have jobs. And so the jobs that are available are such that even if a household, somebody has an income, that income is not sufficient. And that's why we are spending 40, 50% of our money buying food alone before you talk about these other things. So even if a household has money, just because you're spending 50% of your money on food does not mean you're buying nutritious food. Why? Again, because it's expensive. So yes, there's this pipeline that comes from corruption. And obviously the last thing is you're expanding public debt. So someone is taking money that they're not entitled to or not constructing the proper standards of things, and then government has to do that by borrowing money. It may be from the Chinese, it may be from the Germans, it may be from somebody else. But that means that we're actually burdening future generations as well. So it's a whole part of mostly very negative consequences.
Thank you. And Cidi, one of the goals, in fact, goal number one of the Sustainable Development Goals, recognizes that in order to eliminate poverty, governments need to cut down on the cost of living by ensuring access to food, to shelter, to clothing, to education, to health. You've advocated very strongly for a reduction in the cost of specifically staple foods, unga, with the unga revolution. But really, Cidi, I want to be a little bit cheeky and provoke you by saying, is not the cost of food driven by the market, and therefore government would be better off leaving that particular sector altogether to the market forces, and that unga and food would generally find its own level based on demand and on supply, and that would ensure that people are able to access, which you're constantly advocating for, which is good, affordable, nutritious food.
Well, food is a human right. One of the people who have been advocating that government must be able not to privatize sectors that people consume, the basic commodities. Like, for example, the market has been there. And if today the Kenyans who are not eating or who cannot get nutritious food, it's because of the failure of the market system. Because when you let access to food to the forces of supply and demand, and where we have unscrupulous people who are hoarding food, who are buying all the maize from the stores, buying all the sugar from Mumias, selling them to South Sudan and creating artificial shortages, then you expose the people in the poor backgrounds or people who are having low incomes to price shocks. You know, since the 2008 and 2011 food price hikes, you find that Kenyans have undergone a lot of stress. People have changed their lifestyle. You find that people who used to eat 3 meals in a day only eat 1 meal in a day. People have sent their relatives home. People have divorced their wives. If you go to slums, people have sent kids to go work. So that stress has led to the failure of the social fabric of the community. That's why we are saying that government has a sole responsibility of providing social security to the people. The Article 43 that we have just mentioned is very clear that the government should provide social security to the people who are unable to fend for themselves and their dependents. It means that government must come up with a program that ensures that those people with the low income bracket, or those people from poor backgrounds in rural areas and in urban areas who can't afford food, government must provide mechanisms to ensure that they eat. The law is clear that everybody has a right to dignity. When you are hungry, you are begging for food, then you don't have dignity. So we believe, as a social movement, that sectors of food, housing, healthcare, education, government must have considerable investments. You say that government doesn't grow food, yes, but government must promote policies that encourage food production. For example, we have peasant farmers, and studies have shown that peasant farmers provide over 70% of food globally. But if you look at what government has been promoting, commercial agriculture, which is pursuing profit, but we have small-scale farmers, like my mother in Mariwa. She has a very small farm. She produces maize for livelihood, not for market. So when you expose her to global market prices, then you drive her out of the market. The government must ensure that they invest in, for example, irrigation, so that our farmers can be protected from effects of climate change and unpredictable weather. So I believe that if we let the market to decide accessibility of food, these are people who are driven by profit. And you find that if the government cannot come in to regulate, then you will find that these people will set prices with an intention of making the marginal revenue that they are going to have, so that they can be able to make more profit and continue surviving. That's what we are saying. We are not stopping. We are not saying that the government should close Unga, the government should close these companies that are selling food, but the government should have a mechanism to ensure that those who cannot go to supermarkets and buy that Unga at 120, then there's a place where they can buy it. Let me finish by saying this. If you look at a packet of Unga, which is 120. When you go to a market somewhere in Kitale or Kakamega, you will find this maize being sold in a gorogoro. The woman takes it there. She goes to what is called Kisiagi Mahindi. She takes it there and brings back. But when you see that, when you are advertising food, so we are paying for the advertisement. We are paying for the colored packet. We are paying for somebody taking maize from Kitale, going to process it in Mombasa and taking it back to Kitale. What we are saying is that government can zone and see that this area is producing maize. Let them have storage facilities. Let them have granaries so that people can be able to store their food and can access it in a price that is cheap for people. So we are saying that government must actually be a big stakeholder in providing economic and social rights of the people.
Elizabeth, Joan has made the link between cost of living and jobs. So taking on earlier from the number that was that I took, in fact, off of the statistics, 32,000 shillings being an average of what people are earning, and the cost of living being what it is. Your area, I know, is the rights of producers, of workers, and of consumers. Has government, in your estimation, done what it can to provide an enabling environment for job creation? We saw in the very recent youth summit, government outlining a number of things that it has done to support young people to become entrepreneurs as a way of creating sustainable jobs, on the one hand. On the other hand, should we not now get to the place where we become a little bit practical and pragmatic, and I'm saying this deliberately to almost provoke you, and put people in jobs, any jobs, and then after that we can debate such things as quality of the jobs and whether they should have rights within those jobs outside of the very basic rights, as long as they are earning something rather than nothing. And does not, in fact, the position that the Kenya Human Rights Commission takes from time to time go against that and reduce, by virtue of the many demands that you have on employers, the ability for employers to create jobs for the very many unemployed and therefore contribute to the problem of cost of living?
Thank you very much for your question. First and foremost, I don't think the government has done enough. What the government has tended to do year in, year out is to increase the minimum wage, which is not a solution to the high cost of living. You do not, increase the minimum wage so that you enable people to afford more, because what you do is that you encourage companies to lay off people because then they cannot afford to pay them. So in that sense, I don't think the government has done enough. But I think the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that all human beings are born equal in dignity and rights. And I liked it when he talked about dignity, because in as much as we are talking about rights, we also have to look at dignity. So is the job that you're providing enabling me to live a dignified life? So I would like to contradict the position that you're probably provoking me to take, and say that it is not enough to just create jobs for job's sake. We must be creating jobs that enable people to live a dignified life.
My question directs to Mr. John Clos. Lack of food, lack of shelter is very demeaning. And immediately you lack those basic things, you have to find for a solace. Either go to church or you go to a public place or public park. In 2014, we as poor people, because we lack food in our houses, lack shelters, we always like go to Jivaji Gardens to relax. In 2014, you and Mr. Evans Kidero, there was an issue of commercializing and destruction for Jivaji Gardens. I myself, I even wrote a letter to Mr. Martinez. I think his name was Martinez. Martinez, I don't know who. It's an Italian name. I don't know his Italian name. It's called Martinez Backstone. About the issue of Jivaji, because of issue of commercialization and destruction of that park. And in that letter, I copied it to you. Until now, I know we got a response. I also copied to Jeanette Ellsworth. She was, I think, was a public information officer. So with the issue of people lacking food, lacking shelters, and you know, Nairobi, there's no public spaces where people can relax. How do you take it? How much was used they said that it was, I don't know whether it was rehabilitation, but the main agenda was to commercialize that place so that we poor people cannot enter that place. Can you answer? And then after this, I'll give you this letter that you want. I don't know. I never get an answer from you. So I
The
think after
direct
this, I'll
question
give you.
being, sorry, the direct question being what?
The direct question. The park where poor people must relax. Why do UN Habitat commercialize the place?
Okay, commercialization of parks. Second question.
Thank you very much. My name is Raphael Maleto from Trusted Society. My question, I want to direct it to the economist. What is the link between food prices going up and maybe government taxes? Because I feel that the prices of foods and everything in Kenya is going high because government is increasing tax every day. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kimanzi Nicholas. My question would be directed to Kwame and anybody else who can answer this. Why haven't you as an institute, pushed the government to have a public meal, a public milling, say a milling that belongs to the public? Because after farmers, harvest, you hand over that harvest to private millers who now have the audacity to say this is the price that we're going to give or to sell to the citizen. So why hasn't up to date government not had its milling structure or something like that?
My name is Gashehe. I'm a member of Bunge la Mwananchi on also Unga Revolution. In French there was that that revolt where the queen, so if you cannot eat bread, you can eat cake. Yeah. So my question is this: the model of economy we have picked in Africa is what has imposed to us by a developing world like North America, Europe, of neoliberal economy. What we are talking about, market forces. But in this country, before IMF and World Bank imposed on these us, and Kwame Owino with his institute, and some people call it the running dog of World Bank and IMF, they imposed to us privatization. Privatize KICC, Kenya Creameries, privatize all cooperative movement that were feeding everybody. And big professors in this country learned through cooperative movement. Before that, we were feeding ourselves until this big animal came. So my question is this: is it time now we go back to our original mission of economy that we had before? Because even the entire Europe is in crisis, North America also is in crisis. You saw the bank being rescued. Why are we always not willing to think beyond our nose? And we have this Institute of Economic Affairs, which has been pushing for privatization of everything, even the Jivanji Park, through my friend here.
My name is Frederica. I come all the way from Mombasa. I work for an organization called Muslims for Human Rights. My question is, has the devolved government system affected the prices of food in Kenya? And I'm saying this because in Mombasa, if a truck of food comes from upcountry entering Mombasa, there is revenue that is charged to that particular truck. So has it affected the prices of food? Thank you.
Why doesn't the government own a milling company? And I will tell you this, the knowledge of economics that I have tells me that the government would not run a milling company well, if at all. Why? Remember one of the things that happens in Kenya is that basically, if you consider our neighbors, Kenya is the most expensive producer of maize compared to Uganda, compared to Tanzania, even South Sudan, believe it or not. But one of the things that government does is government subsidizes large maize farmers, many of them whom live in a place called Transoia. They produce maize, and then government gives them a premium. So while they produce maize for 1,800 per bag, government pays them 2,400 from your taxes. And then they sell that maize back to the millers, who then selling to you at 120. So you have to get your heads together. Do you want government in the business of transferring poor people's money to big millers or not? So this idea that if you fix government into something, it destroys. I think if you understand a little bit about economics, you would know that I cannot sit here in my job and talk about something because I am a taxpayer as well. So in milling, I don't think government should. What you need to ensure is that there's competition among those millers. Remember, this is a government that this year, if you know the National Cereals and Produce Board, which collects maize, has had to throw away 400,000 bags of maize because you and I paid for it in advance. They've kept it for 8 years. It is rotten now, and it's now being thrown away. So whether government is your friend or not in terms of food policy is something for you to consider for yourself, but I'm not sure that government would. I know at the same time that there are many parts of this country, including at the coast, in many parts of this country, even here, that there are private milling farms that actually do a good enough job. So let me go now to the question about, do taxes affect the prices of food? They do. For instance, if you understand in the year 2013, one of the first things that the present administration did was to pass a VAT law. Now, thankfully, many foods were actually exempt, though they intended initially to come in. I didn't see any of you now speaking here in the fight, but one of the things we were completely opposed to was to apply VAT to food. And that's a fight that was won, not only by us, many people actually participated in that. But remember one thing, an economy is a connected thing. Please understand that. So one of the things that happened was VAT went up. If you have fuel, which is subject to VAT, and fuel is used in the production of food, in the manufacturing end, that cost will show up in your food anyway. So I think an understanding of economy in terms of connected thinking is important, and I would personally recommend it to the gentleman who spoke last, because it may help you in the future. One of the things we must do, everybody needs an opinion, but don't come to a debate with your own facts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. With due respect, I would want to disagree with my colleague, because to me, if those economics cannot provide food on the table, then they are trash. Whether you call yourself a professor of economics, to me, that woman in Madare who can budget with 100 shillings to feed a family for a day is the economist. So what we are saying, to us, we have been pushing, because this economic, I agree with Gasheke, that this economic model has failed. The global financial crisis of 2008, 2009 was a failure of the global economic system, the global financial systems, but because they don't want to take responsibility, they are passing it to the people. They are saying that it is government that has failed. Let me tell you one thing. How come Safaricom is making profit and then government can't run a farm like Safaricom? Why? Why is it that when it is now in government, now that is failing? This is the deliberate effort by the global financial systems to make sure that the government does not provide basic services so that they can make profit. And from the social movement perspective, and we have been having this fight for a long time, some of this globalization, let me say something like WTO, for example, agreements on agriculture, the trips, the trims, those things, you find that they are a direct affront on the poor people, especially those who are in the bracket of food production. Research has stated that over 70% of food eaten in this world is produced by peasant farmers. Farmers who are producing in small scale for livelihood. When government targets large scale farmers, how many large farmers do we have? And who are they? These are people who have history of corruption, talking about people who are largest farmers have stolen money from the government. And therefore now when you focus your policies to target people who are conducting large scale farming, then you are leaving out a very big bucket of people who are actually feeding the majority of the Kenyans. What I'm saying is this. The government can have millings for the people. Because if government has prisons in all counties, if they have a prison in Kisumu, why can't they have a milling plant? If government is collecting taxes in Kangemi, in Madare every day, why can't they give back to the people? So this economic model, that is capitalistic in nature, is the one that is geared towards making government, saying that because government, there's corruption in government, so we can't trust government with giving these services. Let's have Kwame and Cidi come with a company to provide food. When you commercialize food, when food is being driven by profit, then you are denying the people their right. Food is a human right. And what we are saying, why do we have a government? We're having a government to provide those issues that we cannot provide for ourselves. For example, if you go to Madare, we have a farm from Europe providing water. When they close, who will you ask? So government is trying to escape accountability, and the way the global financial system operates, they operate in a way that governments escape accountability by saying that let us bring a private farm to provide water. You know, when I'm selling you tea, when I close my hotel, you can't take me anywhere. I decide to go, you can't take me anywhere. So government is trying to escape accountability. What we are saying is that we need to have a new economic model that is exclusive, that is socially just, and that respects human rights.
I'd like to respond to the question that Gasheke asked, but first say that privatization is not necessarily a bad thing. It has both merits and demerits. And just to add on to what he has said, but from a different angle, privatization does not mean that the government then has no responsibility towards fulfillment of economic and social rights. It is very clear when it comes to economic and social rights that the government has the responsibility to fulfill, meaning that it has to make an investment. So it doesn't mean that because the government has privatized schools or hospitals, for instance, that it has no responsibility towards ensuring that people access the right to health and the right to education. It must make the investment in education, for instance, hiring of teachers, building of schools, equipping those facilities, and so on and so forth, to ensure that that right is enjoyed. Because with economic and social rights, if that kind of investment is not made, then the right cannot be enjoyed. So I'd like to, I think you have a very adverse opinion about privatization. To me, it's not necessarily such a bad thing. It has both, but there needs to be, some kind of balance.
I don't know exactly what happens, and I don't know exactly if I understood the question, but we are collaborating, or we did some collaboration with the government of the city of Nairobi for different public spaces, and those public spaces, they should be public. If they are not used by the public, they are not doing what they were designed for. If there's any change of the destiny of the park or the accessibility to the park, what must be very clear is that our function in this project, it was to support the government in do a project, a cost-efficient project, in order to devolve this space to the public to be used. And you can, if that is not the case, you can use my words, and, demanding that everything is used for the purpose that it was designed for. We were in a very interesting collaboration in order to increase the provision of public and common spaces in Nairobi, and we were very happy for that, because one of the things that is lacking in Nairobi is sufficient public space. And in fact, we are supporting any measure to increase the provision of public space, which means that it should be accessible for everybody. I just like also to comment a little bit on the other questions, because I think it's very important, the debate about development and growth. I think that what is behind the idea of the Sustainable Development Agenda for 2030 of the United Nations is the fact that when you are at 1,200 or of $1,500 per capita, you need development. You cannot reach a decent life for everybody if you don't increase development and we reach as soon as possible $5,000 per capita or $10,000 per capita. Then one of the responsibilities of the government is to set the rules of the game of the economy and the society in order that this country can develop as many others have done in history. Because reaching development is possible, provided that one takes the measures that conduct to this end. And then the question is to analyze which measures can the government and the society take in order to guarantee development. Because, if we can fight a lot of hours trying to share between us $1,500 per capita, but that is not going to be the solution, because it's very difficult to guarantee a decent life at that level. Then the question that comes immediately to the mind, to the debate, is that which kind of development do we have? Which kind of economy do we have in the country? Is our economy based exclusively in the primary sector, meaning agriculture and extractive industry? Where is industry in our country? Can we accelerate our industrial development? Can we improve our service economy? Because we need to reach as fast as possible $5,000 per capita if we are at $1,000 per capita. And then what can we do? Because if we begin to fight between us in how to divide the small cake, with the growth of the population that you are having, you can sterilize your own situation. You know, the population of of Kenya is growing very fast. You are now 40, how many? 40 something million people and growing. Then you need to grow every year something like 6 or 7% or 8% of your economy. You are centered in the primary sector, which is agriculture and extractive industries. Do you think that that is going to provide you the kind of growth that is going to serve the dignification of your community? And if this is a very important question. And what should be the role of the government? The role of the government should be to set the rules, to set the scenario in order to make possible this growth. And this is what the United Nations is pursuing in the 17 goals of the 2030 Sustainable Development Strategy. The United Nations provided for the first 15 years of this century the Millennium Development Goals, which was a set of, I think it was 10 measures in order to diminish the infant mortality, to increase the water provision, etc. It was 10 issues. Now that has been moved to 17. And the question is that we need to focus our society in the most, pragmatic manner in order to accelerate development and create jobs. Because, the money is not going to fall from the sky. Then how can we make sure that the economy is going to grow? And by the way, from my point of view as UN Habitat, headquartered in Nairobi, I tell you, good urbanization is a tool for development. It should be a tool for development. And what is good urbanization? Urbanization with more public space, with better plots, with a regulation of land which allow for affordable housing. And of course, that is a social effort. That is not going to appear from nothing. That needs to be built up in the society and in the government. And I hope that in a political democratic system where you have different options of government, I think that is very important, the political participation, in order that there's a way that the political programs can be implemented, because there's no other way other than through politics.
So if I may bring you around to a question that I still want to come back to, which is the question of devolution and the effect of devolution on cost of living. But I want to take a number of other questions first. Two gentlemen with the striped blue and white shirt, and the gentleman with the jacket. The only reason why I do that is so that as many people as possible have an opportunity to speak and to be heard. So I will come back to you, I haven't forgotten you. Striped, and then yourself, and then we'll take it from there. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Samuel from the University of Nairobi. My question goes direct to the panel, and you've been speaking about food and all this and affordability of the food. Now, may I hear your comments on how sustainable can we produce our food? We are talking about a mother somewhere. We are talking about a farmer somewhere. But how sustainable is what they are doing so that we produce food in a manner that we are able to feed our country? Secondly, and finally, we are haggling between the government and the non-government. We are doing this, the government is not doing this. And there is a perception that where the government fails, the non-government has a responsibility in one way or the other. So how is the non-government sector functioning where the government is failing? Because to me, I feel there is more than meets the eye, because the responsibility still is not the best. I mean, the action of the non-government and the government is not well. So the non-government should tell us what has been their responsibility and action in relation to what they should do to this country. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Elijah Sikona from Trusted Nakuru.